Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, and I guess we'll say good night too, depending on what time it is around here. This is accessibility monitoring and benchmarking. Just quick introductions, really quick. I'm Mark Steadman. I am at the Q. I am a accessibility development consultant. I work with developing team to work on development and remediation for accessibility issues. My main jam has been single page applications and accessibility, and also accessibility testing for developers. And I will let Sachin introduce himself as well.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, everyone. My name is Sachin Gupta. I'm the Director of Development Services here at DQ. My biggest qualification is this guy here works on my team. So dope. I've been in this space for about 5 years. In addition to being in program management space, I've also self-taught some document accessibility, and then I lead a team of accessibility developers here at DQ. So without further ado, let's just get started. I thought what better to start than throwing in some definitions from Oxford, because all those that know me know that I like copying and pasting stuff from all over the place. So Mark, let's go to the next section here. So let's start talking about benchmarking and monitoring. Let's start with some definitions of what is benchmarking. So on my screen, I have a definition of benchmark from Oxford, which basically says benchmarking is evaluating or checking by comparison with a standard. And in this case, we're talking about accessibility. Most of the organizations and teams stick with some sort of WCAG standards or some local international standards that they're using. So for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to stick with benchmarking against some sort of accessibility standards, which are applicable for web and mobile platforms. Now let's go to monitoring. Monitoring, Oxford says, monitoring is observing and checking the progress or quality of something over a period of time. Now, we need to keep it under systematic review. They don't bold it, but I would, if I were at Oxford, I would bold that section in there which says keep under systematic review. That's the portion where a lot of organizations struggle over a period of time. So for the purposes of this presentation, what are we going to focus on, benchmarking or monitoring? And if you ask anyone at DQ, our answer to that is you need both. You need to monitor the progress over a period of time, and you need to benchmark that against a standard so that you know how you're tracking over a consistent standard available on the web. So why do we need this? There are some risks and costs associated with accessibility. There is a survey out there from UsableNet. The 2019 survey came out with the details that I'm showing on the screen right now. 4 years of continued legal pressure. 2016 had 262 cases. 2017, that jumped almost 3.5-fold, went to 814 cases. 2018 and 2019 came up just above or just around 2,300 cases each year. Now, the folks at UsableNet think that the cases in 2019 were impacted by the lawsuit. Lawyers were waiting for Supreme Court's decision in Domino's. But they also think that Domino's actually had an effect. They actually saw a bump in accessibility lawsuits after Supreme Court decision, not to hear the Doble versus Domino's pizza case. So this is about a case every hour. So there's a lot of legal risk in this. Some more information on the same aspect. One slide back, please, Mark. Thank you. Most of these cases, almost 1,500 cases out of these 2,235 in 2019, they came from retail and restaurants. So it's not just the large organizations anymore that are getting sued, everyone. And very important aspect here, which is where the monitoring aspect comes in, 21% of these lawsuits were against companies that have been sued in the past. So 21%, that's almost, 500 cases? That's a lot of risk to take on. In addition to the legal risk, there's costs. So now we're gonna go to the nice bug slide there. This is a study conducted by multiple organizations. One we use is what IBM did a few years back, which talks about the cost to fix a bug, depending on what stage it is caught in. If a bug is caught during conception, if it takes 1x to fix it, as we go towards the right in SDLC, design takes 10x the cost, development 100x the cost. And if it goes all the way to testing and release, that could be as high as 1000x. Now let's add some more flavor to it. The graph that I'm showing on the screen now, that talks about when most of the bugs are introduced in a product, when they're mostly found, and the cost to repair. In dollar terms, the cost to repair, if something is found in coding, is 25 bucks. If it's post-release, that goes all the way up to $16,000. Almost, these are all averages. However, the interesting part for me in this graph was the majority of bugs are introduced before unit testing phase. 85% of the bugs are coming in at that stage. If you have means in place to test for accessibility at that stage without putting too much extra effort in, just imagine the amount of cost saving you can have for the organization. Now, let's talk about some of the intangible risks that come with the accessibility issues. Now, this data I got from an article published by AIA Trust, so this is applicable to small businesses. However, I claim that this is as applicable, if not more applicable, to even large organizations. The biggest impact that anyone sees, and this is all in addition to not having equally accessible content, losing market share, this is about things that people sometimes don't think about. Reputation. When a company's reputation is tarnished, you're losing clients, you're losing employees. Financial damages, that's where your legal costs come back in. There is emotional hardship for a business owner, for the employees in the organization. No one wants to work for a company that's being sued multiple times. And in cases of small organizations, it could lead to restructuring of the organization. So the key question that we would ask in this case is, what can we do? What do we do to solve this problem? Well, the obvious answer is software testing, right? The more we test, the more we can be prepared for all these things, the more we can address. And the ideal answer to that will be, well, test everything out. Why not? The problem with that answer, though, is it is ideal. And the world, unfortunately, is not that ideal. That's where we start talking about, well, what should we be testing at every phase? Do we really need to test everything? Or can we consider some critical flows in the organization's website? That's where, Mark, I'll hand it over to you to get into a little more detail about what to test and where to go.
Perfect. Thank you, Sachin. So, kind of playing off of what Sachin said right there, right? When you are specifically looking to create a benchmark or monitor your HTML content from an accessibility standpoint, you need to look at how to test your critical flows of your content to get kind of a snapshot, but not even really a snapshot, right? A lot of times when I do these talks and talk to companies about specifically critical flows, they think, oh, it's just a snapshot in time, right? Think of a critical flow as something that if I'm talking to you, it's your most important flow in your website, right? The most common things. And I'll talk a little bit more about what a critical flow is in a little bit. But a lot of questions we get is, yeah, I do critical flow testing, right? But they're not really doing it. They're doing end-to-end testing, right? End-to-end testing, the objective is to test how an application works by static scans individually or testing a flow from beginning to end. Now, when I say flow, right, understand something. Flow means from beginning to end. That doesn't mean necessarily like, hey, I'm going to do a flow here and there that says, well, you know, I'm going to test X, Y, Z. No, you're going to test from beginning of your site to the end, from the lowest page to the highest page, right? And that's the idea behind it for end-to-end testing. For critical flow testing, what I'm looking at is I'm going to test a specific user interaction sequence, right? So if I'm looking at a pattern or an interaction with a site, for instance, I'm a user buying content from your website and adding it to my cart and checking it out at the end, right? That is a critical user flow, right? Totally same, right? I do this all the time. There's a ton of different flows of people that I work with specifically that I say, hey, what is your critical flow? And they always answer the question with, well, we just go end to end, right? And I say, okay, so from an accessibility standpoint, how do you know what or where you're at from a monitoring or benchmarking standpoint? And they go, I don't know, right? And that's where it comes in. But everybody always asks me this question then too. Okay, Mark, it's cool. You can do critical flow testing once you show me how to do it. How do we do it, right? The big thing we always get is, hey, I want to basically use unit testing to do this. My answer always back is, you can, awesome. But what if I don't have unit testing, right? What if my unit testing doesn't do a critical flow? I just test page to page, right? Okay, that's still fine. You can do that, all right? The one thing that you'll see is you can actually use a tool that we have is called AGet, okay? AGet is a scripting tool that allows for testing in multiple pages, similar to end-to-end testing, and allows you to test critical user flows for accessibility issues. And so what that means at a high level, it's a JavaScript API, a CLI for fetching, scanning web pages, accessibility issues using the attest rules engine. The attest rules engine is Axe Core. So if you guys have heard of Axe Core, it's using that behind the scenes. AGet can be used as a form of scripted testing when you want to fetch and scan web pages for accessibility issues against the attest automated accessibility engines rules. So the cool thing about it is it will scan and test for WCAG 2.1 AA now too by default. It'll use Firefox and allows for page manipulation using scripting. Okay, but the really cool thing about this is it does allow you to do those critical user flows. So let's say my unit test cases, right? A lot of people right now, they're using React or Angular, right? Angular has Protractor, React has Jest, okay? They may not be getting all those user flow testing. That's fine, right? That's okay. What we care about in this standpoint is we want to test that user flow. So AGet will allow you to test those critical user flows. And you may not even know, you may not even have that right now. That's fine. AGet will allow you to do that, right? But when it comes to accessibility monitoring, benchmarking from a unit test case standpoint, everybody gets a little bit confused when it comes to something like spidering, right? Or maybe I say, hey, spidering or like a quick scanning tool, right? So let's jump into that, okay? What's the difference between spidering and AGet, right? Spidering is a web crawler. It's an automated script which browses the web, so your site, in a methodical and automated manner. And crawlers can be used for automated maintenance tasks on a website, such as checking links for validity, validating HTML code, and also accessibility scanning. Now, the one thing to note with it, spidering is a little bit of a newer piece that's out there. So the one thing to know about spidering is, yes, it can have some accessibility quirks to it. There are some spidering tools that do go out there and actually grab accessibility stuff. But you do need to know that spidering, it takes a lot of time. It's a scanning tool. It's not as accurate. And some of the people that are out there, they're not using a tool like Axe Core behind the scenes, right? They're basically using what they think they can test for automation, and you may not get it fully back what we're going to get with AGet, right? So AGet being a scripting-based language that can specifically target a page itself for accessibility issues, that's what this does. It's going to scan your content for it, right? It allows for down manipulation, so I can actually do my critical user flows with AGet, and it also allows for detailed reporting of those said issues. And that's the real aspect you get from AGet versus spidering. Spidering, yes, it'll give you that whole entire list of everything in it, right? It'll say, hey, your links are broken, you have invalid HTML code, and oh yeah, there's some accessibility issues, right? AGet's going to give you that detail, right? It's going to give you those details down in your critical flows of what the accessibility issues are, right? So that's your difference just between spidering and AGet. But the last piece also that everyone always asks when it comes to doing monitoring benchmarking is, yeah, Mark, we want to do, this type of testing. We want to be able to do this stuff, but help me out here. Everybody always says automation can only get so far. So why don't we just do manual testing, right? Well, the truth is you're not wrong, right? Manual testing basically does get you everything, right? It involves testing your web content for accessibility evaluation, keyboard only, assistive technologies such as NVDA and VoiceOver, color contrast testing. The list goes on and on for manual testing pieces, right? And the main driver for manual testing in the past has always been, well, AGet and automation tools like it can only get 50% accessibility violations in critical flow. So it just wouldn't be worth it, right, to do an automated scan to get those, benchmarks for me or monitor my site, my critical flows for accessibility issues, right? Yes, it's true. 50% of violations is true. However, with something like AGet, you are consistently and constantly testing your user flows in continuous integration testing with AGet, and you're getting results back consistently with it, right? And we'll talk about the monitoring aspect here when I get to the end of like the AGet demo. But what you're looking at specifically with it, it's making it so much easier on you, because AGet allows users to script for specific user interactions as well. That's the cool part, right? So let's say there is a manual interaction where like I open a modal and I, as a manual tester, screen reader test, right? Cool. What I can do is I can get 50% accessibility violations on that same interaction, right? Using AGet. And that's the cool part about it, is I can script to do that. I can open a modal, have it go inside there, check to make sure focus goes inside the modal itself, right? It can do that. And it'll rerun those same scenarios automatically and take the time out of manual testing those scenarios each time, right? The one thing to note though, even though I'm the one pressing the AGet and we're pressing monitor and benchmarking, it is always good to have a manual testing of your critical flows in place as well, right? So if I'm going to monitor my content, and let's say I do get that 50%, 50, 60% accessibility violations, that's awesome, right? But I still want to have that manual testing in place for those critical flows so I can test that last little piece of it, right? So now we've kind of talked about, specifically the differences with critical flow versus end-to-end testing, right? What AGet is, what AGet can do for those critical flows, right? But let's look at it. I keep saying critical flow. What is a critical flow, right? I used to work at a Fortune 50 company. And when I was there, this is a question that was thrown around every single day. What is a critical flow, right? If you think about it and break it down, what is the most common use case pattern for users on your site, right? If you're a retail site, shopping site, what is the average pass someone does to add something to their cart? If I'm a banking site, what is the direct line to logging into their account? And then what do they do when they get inside that, right? There's different ways that you can actually check to see how to get to a critical flow, right? Which is watch how your users navigate and interact your site. There's hundreds of, even thousands right at this point, of ways that you can monitor your website and get those interactions, how to navigate, interact within your website, right? That allows you to get that critical flow data so you know how your users are using that. If you can't do that, right? What are your top 15 to 20 pages, right? And is there any interactivity patterns that exist within those pages itself? Because there are, that more than likely is going to end up being a critical flow, right? And then some other ones to it too. Customer evaluation and feedback. Specific feedback, right, can help you figure out how users are using your site, and it can help you identify your critical flow. As crazy as that sounds, there's been a lot of scenarios I've seen where customer feedback has actually told them, oh, this is how customers are using this site, right? So critical flows, yes, they can be a little bit difficult to find. When you start kind of looking at it as a whole, right, it's not too difficult, right? You look at it and say, what is my most common use case pattern, right? And different ways I can get to that use case pattern allows me to get to that critical flow. Yeah. So now that we've talked about critical flow and AGet, let's just get right into it, right? I want to be able to show everybody in here what specifically AGet is and what it can do for you as far as scripting goes. So I'm going to drop out of the PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to actually bring up a testing suite for you. So let me take one sip of water real quick. So what I have up on the screen is an example of an AGet script, okay? And I'm going to show you two different examples here. What I'm going to show you, and I apologize if I'm looking left of my screen. I have a big screen on this side so I can see everything. What I'm going to show you is two separate pieces. I'm going to show you guys a static page, and I'm going to show you guys a critical flow type of test. What I mean by static and critical flow, we talked about critical static, okay? We kind of talked about this before in the previous slide. If, let's say, I don't know my common use case patterns, I don't know how my users interact with my page, but I do know my top 15 to 20 pages, I can still count that as a critical flow for a user to go through with it, right? So what I'm showing right now on the screen is an actual...
Hey, Mark.
Yes.
Can you zoom in a little bit or increase the zoom font size, please?
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. There we go. Thank you, Sachin. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I have up on the screen right now, I have a JSON object. So AGet will run off of JSON objects. They call them specs. And in the specs, my JSON object kind of rolls down like this. It starts with projects, rolls into the name of the actual scan itself. So I'm using a tester site that we at DQ have that's called ABCD Tech. I'm going to name this whole entire scan. So I'm just calling it ABC Tech Static Scanner. And inside that, it takes an object called page list. And that page list, I can name each one of the pages I want to scan. So let's say I don't have this fully have a critical flow, but it's still enough for me to be like, hey, these are my critical pages I want to test, right? AGet allows you to do that. So what I'm doing here is I'm just creating an ABC Tech scanner. The name of these ones I have in here are homepage, ABC Tech Computers, and ABC Tech Desktops. Those are all 3 different pages that I can test. And adding things to this is super, super simple. It's really as simple as just adding in one little piece. So what I'm doing right now is adding in another page. So I'm going to do ABC Tech Support, if I can type. I'm going to add in the specific URL, which I have saved over here. It's going to save time by not typing this out the whole way. There we go. Okay. And then once I have that up and running, I'm going to save that. Okay. And now what I'll get, the really cool part about this is when I actually run this content. Okay. So what I'm doing right now is I'm going to run this from NPM, so Node Package Manager. This does work as a command line tool as well. You get the same effect with it. So when I run this actual tool, what I'm doing is I'm going to run a static scan. I'm basically just running ABC static, which basically runs AGet spec. Spec then looks for this ABC text static flow JSON. And then when I get done with it, I'm going to tell it I want you to post the results that I get from it, which will be a JSON HTML file, directly to this ABC text static flow piece. So I'm going to run this really quick and run the static scan. In this instance, I'm going to let this actually run in Firefox out. This can run headless 110%. Just for demonstration purposes, I'm allowing it to pop out in Firefox, so I want you guys to be able to see it. It just comes through. You'll notice the pages are changing. So right now I'm on laptops and notebooks. It'll go into desktops. It'll go into the support page then too at the very end. And this will allow me to see those different flows that I have within my site itself. Now, once this gets done running, you'll notice it will get some results back. The results themselves are really cool to see. It'll be by default a JSON and an HTML file. The HTML file and the JSON file can be a little bit large when you first see it, and you'll be like, man, Mark, this is a lot of stuff. But I'm going to go into my results folder, and I'm going to look at the JSON object itself. And you'll notice this violations array right here is going to give me the exact violations that exist on my page. It's going to show me specifically what the issue is. And then it'll have this help URL, which will tell me how to fix the issues that exist on my page too, which is a really cool aspect of the tool because it does allow you to actually see how to fix specific accessibility issues. So if I open this up really quick and go to these public facing pages that we have with this, it'll show me what the issue is, how to fix it, why it matters, and then the rule description specifically behind it. Again, the cool thing about this tool with AGet is you're running basically the Axe Core engine rules behind it. So it can be used also as a learning tool. Full disclosure, I say this every time when I talk about AGet or test, this is how I learned accessibility, is doing this stuff, right? So it does allow you to do that. Now, the other thing you'll get back from it as well is the HTML report. Yes, a lot of times developers say, I love JSON objects. Show me JSON objects, right? Okay. But sometimes we have to be realistic and say, well, maybe I don't necessarily want a JSON object back itself. I kind of want to be able to see my results. So if I can see my results, right, I'm going to sit there and say, okay, yes, now I get a better picture of where I'm at from an accessibility standpoint. So I'm going to open up this specific page. Go. Now, when I get back the HTML report will show me all my violations the same way that you saw the JSON object before, but it'll show it in more complete format. So in this case right here, I've got violations being 56. I can see the elements must have sufficient contrast, images must have alternative text, forms must have labels, and links must have discernible text. All in a nice, neat format that allows for people who may not be as familiar with accessibility now to kind of see, oh my goodness, this page in their critical flow has got 56 issues, right? Oh my goodness, okay? It allows for that to be in there, okay? So that's what you'll get back by default. But when I'm looking at that, that's just a static scanner. That's one aspect that you can do with this actual tool. The other one is flows. And the cool part about flows is it'll actually allow you to interact with the page. So AGet has some scripting language to it. It all has an API behind it as well. But in this case right here, the same way that I had that JSON object set up, I'm now in a JSON object called ABC Tech Cartflow.json. The name of my actual project is Checkout Flow. Okay, and the name of the page list that I'm going to go through. By page list, I mean the actual user critical flow that I'm going to do. I'm going to call it Add to Cart. So in this case, I'm going to go directly just the homepage for abcdtechdqcloud.com. Right when I go to it, I'm going to click an element in the navigation. That's going to take me to the laptop page, right? I'm going to wait a second when I get to that page and say, okay, let me make sure that this page is loaded. So I'm going to find the main thing I want to get to, make sure it's loaded. I'm going to analyze that laptop page. So I'm going to scan that page for accessibility issues right when I get to it. I'm going to click another element on the page, which is going to add it. Okay. It's going to take me to the details page. So I'm going to wait in the details page for one of my objects to be found on the page. I'm going to analyze my laptop details page then, because somebody might have clicked it, found it, said, okay, I want more details, right? And then the last step would be to click it to add it to cart. I add it to cart, and then the cart page then shows up with it, right? Boom. That's a user critical flow right there. So for my website, right, my actual ABCD computer tech site, right, I'm going to it, I'm clicking a laptop, I'm going to go directly to that content itself and see more details. I say, yeah, I want that, and I'm going to add it, right? That might be my critical user flow, okay? As simple as that is, I can actually just go down here and add in some content then too really quick. So for time purposes, I'm going to go ahead and do this really quick and put these in here. But what I can do is I can actually add in another scripting piece. So within that exact same flow that I had previously, okay, what I'm doing now is I'm pretty much just saying, hey, guess what I did? I'm going to have an add to cart inside checkout flow, and I'm going to have a checkout guest flow too. And that checkout guest flow basically allows me to say, hey, I'm going to do a checkout guest flow, and this guest flow itself will basically say, hey, when I get done, I'm going to analyze this page really quick as a checkout guest. So now I have two flows within a checkout flow, okay? I have a basic add to cart checkout flow, and I have a guest checkout, which just takes me directly to the cart. I click a button, and it goes, right? And that's the easy piece with it then too, okay? So when we're looking at this now, a lot of people always turn to me and say, okay, that's cool, but what can I get back from this really quickly, right? And the truth and the answer to it is whatever you want, right? When a lot of people look at this as far as a critical user flow, they say, well, Mark, this is cool and all, but I want to be able to keep adding on to this. You can. You could add a million different checkout flows to this specifically, and as long as it says it's valid with it, it's going to keep going. And that's the cool part about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and run this here in 1 second. As soon as this thing starts barking at me. Okay, for time purposes, I'm just going to hear that sucker there. There we go. Yep. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a critical scan. And what you'll notice when I run this is Firefox will pop up. And when it does, I will pull on the screen to describe what's going on to you. Okay. So I popped up. The main homepage pops up. As we talked about in that first checkout flow itself, I'm going to go to the laptops and notebooks page. I'm going to go in there. I'm going to go to details. And now I'm going to jump into cart. Once I get to cart, I'm going to scan the cart page here. Now, this isn't a pure working site. So when I get to it, right, I'm not going to necessarily get a scanning piece that comes back with it. But now I've gone through that critical user flow, and every step along the way, I'm scanning for accessibility. And that's the really cool part about it. So now when I get done with it, my second flow that I was testing, which is going right now, you just can't notice it because it's going really quick, is I went directly to the checkout. I went to it, boom, I get the results back. And now if I go to the results folder that I had before, all those flows that I had, the checkout flow, add to cart, and then the cart page is here, right? Checkout flow, checkout guest, cart full page, boom, is right here, right? And that's where you get that continuous testing, those continuous interactions, right? Where we talked about before, when you're using something like AGet to test a critical user flow, you can get 50 to 60% accessibility violations. And that is the best part about it, is I can consistently do those same manual things I would do with a critical flow testing manually. I can now cut that time in half by using something like AGet and allow myself to monitor those issues, right? But now that we have that AGet scripting for critical flows in place, right? And you've seen the output, right? Right here, we have an HTML file and a JSON file for each one of those times I call analyze within my AGet scripting, right? You can use the output restorer to see the status of your content accessibility perspective. But again, remember, that's only a snapshot in time right then and there, right? And where monitoring and benchmarking accessibility issues comes full circle using something like AGet, right? Is when you can see that data within a dashboard itself. So I'm going to turn it back over to Sachin here really quick, who's going to talk about the dashboard aspect of monitoring as well.
Thank you, Mark. And here I am back with some pretty pictures, as I initially promised. So as Mark suggested, AGet gives you a very, very easy means of writing some critical flows if you don't have automated tests available in your application already. If you have them, great. You can use a test or Xcore APIs behind the scenes and still use the dashboard that I'm going to talk about. Same thing with AGet. The The drawback of these, if I can use the word drawback, is it's a point in time snapshot. So you need a way to track this over a period of time. And that's where a dashboarding solution comes in. You can use any dashboarding solution. There are multiple ideas out there on what to track and what not to track. I'm going to show you just one thing that we do and we have started doing, and we are constantly evolving it based on what we are hearing from the market. So the first piece I'm showing is some key performance indicators coming out of these AGet scans. You know, um, it shows 4 performance indicators: number of total issues, the accessibility score, the total number of pages with issues in the different flows, and total number of pages that had critical issues in these different flows that Mark coded for. And it gives you a very quick snapshot of where the scores increase for the worse or decrease for the good, or in some cases, for example, pages with issues and pages with critical issues, if the score decreases, the number decreases, that's for good, right? So you can have some KPIs defined like that. That'll score this that'll track this information over a period of time. So that's the first piece of the dashboard that you need to think about, something that can give very quick snapshot. The second aspect that we track as part of our dashboard is the accessibility score. Now, why do we need an accessibility score? The problem with any accessibility metric is it's never complete. It's never baselined so that you can compare 2 things together. That's where accessibility score comes in handy. Is it an exact science? No, but it's a very good starting point based on the algorithm that you choose. So we came up with a metric that we use to define accessibility score, and the flow that Mark showed you, that's what depicted on the screen over a period of time. Since November 23rd to all the way up to January 25th or something, we're tracking this checkout flow, and we see the trends here. It started at 0 on November 23rd, went all the way up to somewhere around 35, came back down to about 20, then came back up to about 30, and then it's starting to stabilize, but it's showing a downward trend. So the next piece that I want to understand as a manager is, well, what is causing this downward trend? That's where we can drill down into this metric a little bit. So the 3 flows that Mark talked about in his flow, the add to cart, the checkout guest, and the checkout user, as I drill down, I can see the same accessibility score for all 3 of these. And by looking at the charts here, I can see the most of the variation is being accounted for by the checkout guest flow. So now I know where the root cause of the issue is. One more thing that we added as part of this accessibility dashboard is a grouping of the issues. So not only do I know where the problem is coming from, I'm grouping those issues in some very specific categories that can give me a very quick view into what's wrong in each of these categories. So we have an issue group breakdown bubble chart where the size of the bubble actually indicates the magnitude of the problem. So if I were to roll this up, you would see that over this entire flow, the biggest problem is color contrast issues. So I know immediately that I need to go back to my design team to figure out a color palette that'll work and be accessible at the same time. So can be any dashboard. You have to pick up some metrics as a starting point. I know Greg Williams is going to talk about metrics in general in another DQ presentation tomorrow. So if you're interested, please attend that. He has some great ideas that he's going to share. This is, as I said, just one of the things that we started tracking. So with that, any questions for us?
Yeah, we have a number of good questions. A few that are just about what AGet is. Is AGet open source?
So AGet is open source to a point. It's actually part of our Attest suite, which is our paid for suite. The only thing publicly that's close to AGet would be something like AxCLI. But AGet's got more robustness to it as far as reporting and things like that go. And if there's more information needed, you can always talk to somebody within our marketing team about AGet. But as far as it being public, it's not. It's actually our paid for piece, so it's within our organization where we have it. But again, publicly, something that would be similar to it would be AxCLI, but it's not going to get you the full robustness that you kind of saw with what I was showing on there.
Great, thanks. Mm-hmm. And does it work with Chrome?
Yes, yeah. All you have to, there's a setting piece on there that allows you to actually do it with Chrome. By default, it's Firefox because Firefox has normally been the browser of choice for accessibility testing, but it's starting to get that shift to Chrome a little bit more. So, but yes, it can work with both.
Great. Does it work with a screen reader?
Oh, so really what you're looking at with AGet is if you are using AGet like I did, so I was using Node Package Manager to actually run it. Really at that point, you're just looking at the ability of whatever integrated development environment tool you're using to be able to use it with a screen reader. So normally what I would suggest if you're using an IDE, and again, some people are more comfortable with different IDEs, that's perfectly fine. The one that I see more accessible than any others is Visual Studio Code, which is what I was using here. So I would suggest that. Everything as far as the reports and stuff that we get back, that should all be accessible. So everything's accessible from that standpoint. But as far as using AGet, it's more of your preference of what IDE you want to use that'll work best with a screen reader to set that up. And my personal preference with that is Visual Studio Code. Just seems to be the easiest to use from that standpoint.
Great. Will AGet handle pages behind a login?
Yeah, yep, absolutely. Yeah, so that's just part of the flow piece then too. Normally in security security stuff aside, I'm not the biggest security buff in the whole entire universe, but yes, it can 110%. When you go into it, if you have just like a dummy username and password behind a test firewall, you can absolutely log into a site and then go forward with it too. And yeah, tons of people have used AGet to do that in the past, and there's no issue with that whatsoever.
That's one of the key critical differences between some of the spidering products and
Yep.
a critical flow monitoring product like AGet.
Yep, that's a great point. Absolutely. Yep.
Awesome. And here's a more kind of holistic question. What approach would you recommend to implement accessibility to an already developed website? Should we start development again?
That's a really good question. So I'm sure Sachin has more to add on to what I'll say then too. So I'll start this one. I've lived that dealing with in a larger organization, dealing with applications that are fully built all the way up and then being like, oh my gosh, do we just start over, right? Don't do that. What you can do is use something like AGet or even like something within a build process similar to like Axe Core, right? To test your content and figure out a strategy of how you want to attack those issues, right? You can say, hey, I want to attack those issues from this standpoint. I'm going to fix on impact, right? You can see the impacts and the violations I showed you on impact. I'm going to fix the critical issues first. Once I knock those critical issues out, now we're going to aim for serious, right? Now we're going to aim for moderate, right? Just kind of trickling down on those pieces. Yes, when you run this inherently, you might be like, oh my gosh, I have 550 issues on one page. What do I do? Don't fret, just kind of slowly approach it in that aspect to say, okay, we're going to fix these first, right? If you know there's issues that you cannot fix, right? AGet does allow you within it to exclude some rules. So initially, if it's color contrast and all that has to go back to design, you're like, I can't fix these right now. By all means, just exclude color contrast for now to say, hey, we want that out so we can see where we're actually at from a standpoint. And then when we get the colors fixed, we can come back to it, right? There's tons of different approaches you can take to it. But never just go into it and say, oh, we should just start back over. Absolutely not. No, there's tons of strategies to take. And the normal strategy that I suggest is starting with a scanning tool like this. Even though it's 50%, it's going to teach you, how to make accessible code, create accessible developers. And that's the idea behind the products that we have, is to create accessible developers. So if you start with that pattern of fixing the critical ones first, or the blockers first, right, all the way down through, you kind of have that pattern. Sachin, anything else to add to what I just said there?
You covered most of it. The only additional piece I would add is evaluate the risk. What approach you take depends on what situation you're in. If someone has an open complaint against your website, you may not have the liberty to tackle it one defect at a time. In that case, you may have to go into an approach where you bring in some additional help. Even in that case, you don't need to just start over. There are solutions out in the market that can go and add accessibility fixes to your site, or you can get more people, more help to add accessibility to your site.
Yep.
So evaluate that. The prioritization is always a challenge. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about it. But if that's not a concern, then what Mark suggested is spot on. Start biting into that elephant one bite at a time.
Yep.
Great. Here we have a couple of questions about the dashboard. Is there an open source version of the dashboard?
The one I showed, no. That one is very specifically built on top of our products, and that's just available on top of our paid products. There are open solutions out there which provide you with graphing and charting capabilities, which take CSVs as imports into those products, but then you'll have to do a lot of configuration yourself.
Yeah. And the forewarning I see with the dashboards then too, just adding on top of what Sachin said is, a lot of times those dashboards aren't accessible. The dashboards that we have are, they have formats and tables. All the stuff we have on there is accessible. And like Sachin said, there is a lot of customization that goes in behind the scenes for some of these dashboards that are out there publicly. If you have the effort and manpower to do it, absolutely. But it's one of those things that takes a lot of effort to get out there. There's tons of options. I couldn't necessarily off the top of my head say which ones would be best for it. But again, there's tons of dashboards out there that you can look at. But again, the biggest thing is that most of them, when you look at them, they aren't 100% accessible. And that's what makes it difficult to go through with them too.
Great. And I think this question speaks to the customizable nature of the dashboard. This person asks, if our company has over 100 applications, can we create a dashboard with those 4 KPIs for an overall metric of them all?
Absolutely, yes. It all depends on how you set up those 100 applications. One very simple example is, let's say you have one flow-like thing that Mark showed in his examples. If each one of them is one of those flows, you can have the dashboard configured to roll up all the way up to the organization. You can have it rolling up in such a way that on the process of roll up, on the path to roll up, you're having different people accountable for different pieces, have their specific piece reflected to them. So that's all configurable.
Great. Here's a question. How do you incorporate or flag changes in the critical workflow within the dashboard that might be the triggers of increases in bugs?
Ooh.
That's a good one. So let me see if I understand the question.
Sure.
You have a flow that is being tracked on the charts. You had to make a change to that flow because the business logic changed. Is the question more about how do you capture that something changed in the flow on the dashboard?
I think so. Yeah. How do you incorporate or flag changes in the workflow within the dashboard?
Currently, there is not a way to annotate that on the dashboard chart itself. You will see the change in terms of inflections on the lines themselves. There's no way to annotate it in the current version that we showed to you today. It is something that's on our roadmap. It's a feature that we're actively working on.
Got it. Thank you. Does AGet differentiate between global/repeated issues across the site versus unique issues?
So you can. The way that you do that is specifically with including and excluding content. So I didn't get a chance to show this. I mean, if we had an hour straight just to do AGet stuff, I could probably fill that. But what you can do with it is you can actually exclude content within it. So let's say like I get to a page and every time I run that, you saw me do that like analyze page with title blah, I can actually do with excluding, and I can actually exclude like the header and the footer. You see that all the time. A lot of people say, hey, we don't own the header and footer, right? We just want the header and footer to have their own scans. That's totally a normal use case for it all the time, is people don't want to scan content that's repeated over and over again. So what they normally do is they'll do their critical flows, ignore header and footer, just reusable content across the site. And then what they'll do is just make a static scan like I had right there and just say, hey, I want to scan this page, but I only want to scan the header, right? And just call it the header and just get that scan one time across the board and you're good to go. So yes, you can exclude that content from it then too.
Super. If you already have end-to-end testing with Selenium or Cypress set up, is there a way to run these AGet commands or configs at the same time, or do they need to be run separately?
If you already have Selenium and unit test cases are ready to roll in Selenium, at that time, if you already have end-to-end testing set up, what I would suggest is using something like a test HTML or like Axe Core within your actual unit test cases. This test case with AGet itself is more for teams that may not specifically have a critical flow testing path or those unit test cases. If you have Selenium set up Using something at your end-to-end testing to scan each page already is probably a lot easier for you guys, because what you can do then is, instead of having a separate accessibility testing suite with that, you can actually integrate that directly into your test cases you already have. So if I had like I showed that static scan where I had like homepage, blah, 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 right? What I can do then is I can just put an accessibility test right into that unit test right there, and I'll just get that scanned along the way with it, right? If you already have end-to-end testing, again, critical flow testing is one of those things where you can monitor with it. But the cool thing about it is, if you have a test, you can still use a test HTML and get those same dashboard and metrics we're talking about right here, right? So it does allow for that. I would suggest, if you have those unit test cases set up, you use something within those unit test cases to test for accessibility using Xcore or test HTML to do that.
Great. Do you write separate tests for user flows to check for different states of a component, like a modal?
It depends. That is totally up to how you see your definition of success in the critical flows. So I hate to be the person that comes up here all the time and says, yes, when you do your modal testing, you have to have it in this thing. No. Whatever way you want to have your critical flows set up to actually run a test case. So for instance, if I want to have, like, if there's an interstitial modal in between like jumping pages, and you want to have that flow tested a little bit separately or in a different path, by all means, you can do that, right? There's no harm, no foul whatsoever doing that. Just all you have to do is, within your AGet script or within the actual test you have, just name it, put modal somewhere in there, right? Instead of like checkout flow with interstitial, right? Or you just call it checkout flow and doesn't have the interstitial within there. That allows you to kind of do that, whatever definition of success is for you guys, to do that, right? I don't like to dictate that when it comes down to it. It's up to how you guys, and the ease of whatever your flow is, to add that in, right? If that makes sense. Anything to add to that there, Sachin?
Yes. Thank you. You asked me. I'd put a different dimension to it. So
Sure.
we showed you the dashboards, right, with the roll-ups, and we talked about accountability a little bit there. So there is no reason, or there is no necessity for you to code them separately. However, there could be a good reason for you to code them separately if the people accountable for that content are different. You know, if the modal is being owned by a different team, then you probably want to code it separately, especially if you're using it on something like a dashboard, so that it can appear differently.
Yeah.
So those are the business scenarios that you'll have to think about as you start thinking about how to code for those critical business flows.
Awesome, thank you. Here's a question that refers back to Sachin, where you were talking about the cumulative cost of fixing bugs. Do you recall the source for where you got that cost? This person's asking, where could you find more information or more data on that?
Yeah, that was an IBM study conducted a few years back. We can certainly share the link for that.
Cool. All right. Can somebody without coding knowledge use AGet, do you think?
To be completely honest with you, yes. The reason why is because it's more of a typed out language with scripting than like objects and object-oriented programming, things like that. So for instance, if I'm not that versed in coding, the cool thing about it is the API behind it is super duper specific. So it'll show you how to analyze a page, set it up, get everything set up for your test, and then go through it. It's a really good walkthrough with it. But the cool thing about it is when I was setting up the page itself, when you do it, you're literally typing analyze page with blah, 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 right, as you go through it. So it's almost like you're typing plain English to go through with it and use it, right? So no, you don't have to be an expert at all within coding, right? It might take a little bit to get used to. There's always that learning curve with anything you're doing with new. But in my opinion, it's not really, if you're not the best of coder or like that big of a techie with it, it just takes a little bit to pick up and use. And once you're used to it, you're pretty good with it. And again, what I showed was the node-based version of it, which is a little bit more in-depth. There is an actual command line tool that is a little bit easier to use as well, which is more of an executable, which does have documentation around as well, that you can kind of do the exact same things I was showing there, just within your actual terminal itself. But I'll ask that question to Sachin though too. Do you think that AGet would be easy for you to pick up and use?
Yes. The reason Mark is asking me that question is I'm not a front-end developer. When I was coding, I was a Java-based full stack developer. The answer to that still is yes. I can still use AGet. The only piece of information I need to be able to figure out, which I would call technical, and I know Mark won't, is you may have noticed that he was using the element selectors in that script.
Yeah.
As long as you're comfortable finding those selectors using some right-clicking on the command panels on the developer toolbar, or using some keyboard shortcuts to do that, as long as you can get those element selectors, you can use AGet. I can use AGet.
Awesome. And does AGet check for all WCAG issues and prioritize them?
So you're talking 50% of WCAG violations is what this is going to catch. The prioritization is more, correct me if I'm wrong, Sachin, it's more our prioritization, correct? Not
Correct.
totally based
Yeah.
on WCAG. Yeah.
Yeah, so AGet is built on top of AXScore.
Yeah.
So, we're going to check for issues that we are very confident that we won't give you false positives on.
Yep.
And we give you a severity level attached to it, which you can use to prioritize the issues if you prefer.
Yep.
A lot of our customers do that. If you prefer to use a different severity level or different prioritization, you can absolutely do that. We can give you some pointers around it.
Yep.
Fantastic. And is there an open source option similar to AGet? Does it also do workflows as opposed to just static pages? Those kind of
yeah. Well, yeah. So there is a tool out there. It's called AXCLI. It's a command line tool that uses AXScore. It is similar to AGet. However, the scripting functionality behind it to do like critical flows, it's not there. It's more of a static scanner of content. You can do like the littlest bit of manipulation with it. It's a totally open source project. But again, it's a lot less than what AGet gives you within it. But if you're looking for something just to get a static scan going, right, to kind of like we talked about with critical flows, right? If I think my critical flow isn't necessarily like a flow, but let's say like a certain number of pages, right? I could use something like AXCLI out of the box to kind of test that content, but it's not going to be as robust as what AGet is as far as like traversing through pages and things like that.
Great. All right, well, we have about 5 minutes left. We're charging through questions. I have one here that says, compare AGet versus attest versus comply.
Oh, all right.
You guys touch on that one?
All right, here we go.
You want me to take that one, Mark?
You can, by all means.
So during his presentation, Mark mentioned about spidering versus critical flows versus any sort of end-to-end testing tools. Comply is DQ's spidering engine. So the power for Comply is where you can give it a starting URL and tell it to scan up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 n level deep. It'll go through all those pages, it'll find all the links, and it'll run an AXScore, AXScan on all of those pages and give you a result at the end. Detailed list of issues on each page. What Comply does not offer is the ability to code for your critical flows. It has some very limited ability there, limited to establishing session parameters and things like that. Attest and AGet are more of developer-focused tools, and I say developer-focused with a double quote around it, where they give you the ability to account for these kind of flows. Attest APIs, well, so AGet is a component within Attest. Attest comprises of AGet and Attest APIs. The APIs are what will get integrated with your existing front-end test cases. If you're using Selenium or Cypress or React testing library, you can use Attest APIs, add 2 lines, literally 2 lines within your existing test cases, and your test cases now, boom, start testing for accessibility. AGet complements it, where if you don't have existing test cases, you can use AGet to write some of those critical flows. Did I miss anything there, Mark?
No, dead on.
Fantastic. Thank you. And what percentage of the critical errors have coverage? We understand 50% across the board, but I'm wondering about the critical ones.
That might have to be one that we have to get back to whoever asked that question on. It's somewhere. Off the top of my head, I don't necessarily know, but of all the rules, we can go look really quick and just say what percentage would be critical. that come back from it specifically. But off the top of my head, I don't necessarily know. That's a really good question, actually.
Yeah, sorry, we haven't computed that metric.
Yeah.
Thanks. All right, we're almost at a full hour here, but I know that there was a lot of interest coming in through the Q&A and through the chat. If people want to start getting their hands on AGet, what should they do?
Sachin, I'll let you answer that one.
Reach out to someone at DQ. I think we have a contact us page there, and even a phone number. Just reach out to someone at DQ and they'll be able to put you in touch with the right people who can give you all that information around all the products. We'll be happy to talk to you about your needs and suggest things that we think will suit your needs.
Awesome. All right, well, Sachin, Mark, thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We really had some great discussion, and you had some great questions for us, so I appreciate it. Please do tune in to some of the other sessions we'll be holding tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday. We have a lot of great content that we're super excited to share with you.